Gracious and loving God, thank you so much for this time to study your word. I pray that you speak to us, let us hear you, perhaps see our world and their world. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So I wanted to end with a lesson that I really enjoy and continue to wonder with you. I hope we'll have some good questions and some thoughts about this. But this is Luke chapter 24, found on page 860. So if you've got a table Bible, Luke 24, this is the walk to Emmaus. Now, this story is only remembered in Luke's gospel. This is an Easter story where Pentecost being the last Sunday of the Easter time that we share together. I thought this would be a good one to end with before the summer months. It's only told in Luke's gospel, and there are at least two mysteries within it. So we're going to look at these mysteries together and see if we can't see the story in a new way. So Luke chapter 24, beginning with the 13th verse. I'm going to read it to you, and then we're going to look at some fun things together. Excuse me. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all the things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What were you discussing with each other while you walk along?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find the body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" And then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them all the things about himself in the scriptures. So we'll stop right there, and we'll start with the first mystery. Who are these guys walking to Emmaus? We don't have Cleopas mentioned anywhere else in the scriptures. There's not a St. Cleopas window anywhere, right? There's not one of the 12. Well, that mystery is pretty easy to solve, and when we remember how Luke tells the story. So each gospel account has a different way of remembering what they knew about Jesus and what they saw. This is not newspaper reporting, but rather artful retelling. And so one thing that Luke does is Luke sees sort of discipleship, if you will, as a concentric circle. So you start with Jesus, and then you've got the 12 apostles, the 12 friends that Jesus sent out, the 12 that he was careful to pick to represent 12 tribes, maybe a new Israel, if you will. The 12 that had remained 12. If you remember in the first part of the book of Acts, after Judas has killed himself and is out of the picture, they cast lots for a man named Matthias to restore the number to 12. So you got Jesus and then you got the 12. That's about them. But then discipleship's about us, because anybody can be a disciple. And then outside of the ring, you've got the crowds. So crowds follow Jesus everywhere, but they're not necessarily followers. But anybody can be in the game. So the first mystery that I think is solved is that the men were disciples of Jesus. Not one of the 12, but disciples. People who believed, people who followed, and now people who are surprised by this encounter from the risen Lord. But that's not the only mystery. So the second mystery has to do with geography. So I want to show you a little picture. This is a lovely Crusader-era church 7 miles outside of Jerusalem. It's down Highway 1, going west towards the coast. And at an exit, I know this exit very well. It's called Abu Ghosh. It's a little Arab town. And I know it well because there's a kebab restaurant there that's just to die for. It's the Israeli version of Golden Rule. And everybody's just, you smell the smoke and everybody's lined up and you got to get there early and you wait to eat there. I kind of go from lunch to lunch every day of my life anyway. And so it just so happens that across the street from Najee's kebab place is this church. And it's run by a lovely French order of monks. And this church commemorates the event that I just read to you. They believe, or at least pilgrims believe, that this is the spot or near the spot where Jesus appeared to the men on the road to Emmaus. It's beautiful. The frescoes are absolutely lovely, and it's nice and quiet, and it's certainly worth seeing. Except there's a problem. There's another Emmaus. Uh-oh. So 20 miles down the same highway is an earlier church. This is a late Roman church. This is from the 4th or the early 5th century, late 4th, early 5th century. And this was built in a village called Emmaus, which is named Emmaus. Now the other one is just Abu Ghosh Naji Kebab joint spot. This one is a village called Emmaus, and it was called Emmaus during the time of Christ. It was called Emmaus. Actually, it has some history in that period, that war period called the Maccabees. Remember that story about 200 years before Jesus, where a family of priests actually rebelled against the Greek-influenced leaders and restored the temple. It's where we get the festival of Hanukkah. Those guys are from over here in this neighborhood, and so it has a place in history, even biblical history, and it's named Emmaus. But it's not 7 miles outside of Jerusalem. It's 20 miles outside of Jerusalem. Let's look at the text. Verse 13 again, Luke 24:13. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. Okay, let me repeat the mystery one more time. The Bible says 7 miles. Okay, so Abu Ghosh Naji's kebab joint is 7 miles from Jerusalem, but Emmaus is 20 miles from Jerusalem. What the hey? Well, if you look at your notes, if you've got the table Bible, verse 13, it says, a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles, and there's a little note, an N. So then you look down at the bottom, and you look for the letter N, because this is a study Bible, and it says, okay, in the Greek, 60 stadia. So the Greek text says 60 stadia, and then it says, other ancient authorities read 160 stadia. Okay, this is getting us closer. So I got this from an archaeologist who Don works with, named Danny Herman, Danny the Digger. Danny lives in a really good-looking town called Modine, which is where Judah the Hammer, Judah Maccabee, is actually from. And Danny and I are sitting around having coffee in his living room, and he said, "Rich, I'm gonna tell you, I think it's a mistake." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, in those days, manuscripts were copied by hand. Remember, this is before the printing press, and so Bibles, any grand written documents were copied over and over and over and over. And what Danny believes, with an archaeologist's eye, is that the original text said 160 stadia, which is 20 miles, which is the real Emmaus, okay? But yet, in the recopying of the manuscript, somebody with a sputtering candle, maybe they had a big supper that night, got a little sleepy, and just left off the one and wrote down 60 stadia. And then suddenly a Crusader-era church gets built because a monk fell asleep at the table, okay? Isn't that fun? So listen, that's Danny's theory, and I'm going with it because there is an Emmaus, right, that's 20. Now, the late Romans, whoever built this church, saw it as 20 miles outside of Jerusalem because maybe they had the original manuscript, or they had the one that said 160 stadia. Who knows for sure, but that one predates the Crusader church. And so this gives you an idea of how churches can get it right, and maybe how churches can get it wrong when it comes to being in the Holy Land and looking for stuff. However, this doesn't answer a bigger problem. So we've solved the mystery. Let's just say we've solved the mystery of Emmaus. Thank you, Danny the Digger. However, there's another mystery, and that is why this direction. So I have a little map here, which I've doctored, to show you 3 pilgrim routes to go to Jerusalem for the festival. Now, if you're with me this morning, or you're going to be with me at 11, I'm going to teach you that the Feast of Pentecost is the middle of 3 feasts of the Hebrews. Okay, Passover, which happens in the spring, and it's a movable date because it's a lunar date, kind of like Easter for us. Passover happens in the spring. Pentecost is 50 days later. The word Pentecost means 50. Also, as you will learn with me today, is that Pentecost happens at a time of year when travel is very, very easy. The lake is really placid and the weather's good, and this is why so many people from all over the world were in town for the Feast of the Pentecost to hear the languages, okay? And then you've got Sukkot in the fall festival. So Pentecost is the middle of the 3. However, if you were to travel to the festivals, you had 3 ways to get there, especially from the Galilee, where Jesus is from. So to the east, you would travel down that first corridor, which is the one you probably travel the most, which is on the east bank of the Jordan River, which is now in the kingdom of Jordan. Today, when we travel this thing, if we ever get to do it again, we would travel down a highway right there, hugging the highway on the west bank, but they would travel on the eastern bank of the Jordan and then cross over at Jericho and climb the Jericho Road, which is about 3,000 feet up, which feels like you're driving to Cashers or Highlands, except you start at 1,400 feet below sea level. It's the craziest land in the whole world. And you climb that mountain. And so you have to wonder, why in the world did Jesus walk to Jerusalem at least once a year for the entirety of his life down such a hostile place? That what you're looking at there with the Jordan River, and I like that map because it's a topo map, is the Great Rift Valley, a crack in the earth where the two tectonic plates of Asia and Africa meet, beginning in Ethiopia somewhere, ending up in Damascus. It's the lowest spot on planet Earth. And so Jesus would walk with his friends, hugging the river, carrying water, because if you don't stay close to water or have water with you, you will die down there. Why? Well, it's because the middle way, right down the gut, is closer geographically, and it's more temperate in terms of weather. You've got breezes and Mediterranean breezes and olives and a lot of water, but Samaritans live there. Now also, that middle route is what we call the disputed West Bank, and we've been doing a lot of reading about the troubles over there. That's been part of the troubles that we read in the newspaper, and it was trouble then and it's trouble now. So you didn't go down the middle part because Samaritans would harass you and heckle you and try to get you to go to their temple on Mount Gerizim and all kinds of things. So they would just rather avoid them. So Jesus would travel the dangerous way to the east because he would avoid harassment by the Samaritans, which makes it interesting that in Luke's gospel, the first parable that Jesus tells after he decides to go to Jerusalem to die the final time is the parable of the Good Samaritan. See how that you don't put those words together in their world, and especially when you live in that world. Now, I haven't mentioned the western route. The western route is a highway that exists today. I think it's Highway 6, but it's built over something called the Via Maris, which is the way of the sea. It's a Roman road. Romans, built great roads, as you can still see road beds and follow routes today. They followed the topography very, very well. Easy way to travel. You get good weather over there. It's temperate, but it's out of the way. It's unlikely that Jesus would have traveled that way, if ever, because it's just too around the world. You don't go west and then down, and then from Jerusalem you wouldn't go west and then up. There's just no reason to go that way. You would lose days of travel if you went that way. And yet we're told on Luke chapter 24 that he's headed west on Easter. I wonder why. Well, I want to show you. I want to hold our thoughts. Hold that question open for a minute, and I want to tell you another story. So turn with me, if you will, to 1 Samuel chapter 6, page 217, and then I'm going to show you a picture. Page 217, it's 1 Samuel chapter 6, verses 1 through 12. Okay, so favorite places on planet Earth. This may be my favorite thing I've ever done, favorite thing I've ever seen. It's something I hope I'll see again. I want you to trust me on this because I don't have an hour to tell you why this is true, but I'm going to tell you a little bit. The Ark of the Covenant rested on that rock. We believe the Ark of the Covenant. We believe that the Ten Commandments sat on that rock. And this is in an open field across from a gas station at a place called Bet Shemesh. And it's just sitting out there in the weather, and people walk all around there. They never know that it's there. Now, what you have is a chapel that's been uncovered. The smoke of the chapel, you can see the smoke line there, the little black horizontal line. I don't have a pointer, but there's a smoke line. There are two sacrificial stones outside of it, and then we have the text. I want to read the text to you. 1 Samuel chapter 6. Let me paraphrase before I read this to you. The Ark of the Covenant was lost to the Hebrews for a brief amount of time. It lived for centuries at a place called Shiloh, which is up in Samaria, up in the Samaritan lands now, at the disputed West Bank. It rested at a place with a tent around it. And so the priest Eli and the boy Samuel would serve him. The boy Samuel, who would grow up to be the mighty prophet Samuel, would serve the priest Eli in the temple. But Eli also had two idiot sons, Phinehas and Hophni. They were terrible guys. Oh, they stole from the sacrifices, and they harassed people, and they were just rounders all the way around. And then so that Phinehas and Hophni have this great idea, which is to take the ark into battle against the Philistines. The Philistines had come up to a plain over a hill about that far north, and they decided that they couldn't lose if they took the ark into battle like Joshua. So they took God's presence. Do y'all remember the Ark of the Covenant? You know what that is, right? It's a box with the 10 Commandments in it, okay? And it's got the presence of God. And so they were going to take this box. You've seen the movie. You know what happened to the Nazis? Face melted off when they touched that thing. Okay, so they take the ark into battle like a lucky rabbit's foot, because nothing will happen to them, and they lose it. And then they're killed. And so the Bible tells us that a runner came over the hill, and Ellie's waiting there. Ellie's waiting for news of the battle, and they say, your sons have been killed, and Ellie's like, darn. And then he said, but they've lost the ark, and Ellie fell down dead. It just killed him. It broke his heart. So the Philistines have the ark, and they hot potato it around, because you've seen the movie. You know what happens when you got that thing. And they actually have these 2 plagues are visited upon the Philistine lands. The Philistines live today in Gaza, because that's the kingdom of the Philistines. So all the news from Gaza were their lands along the ocean, there along the coast. And so they just pass it from town to town, and they are afflicted with 2 horrible plagues, tumors and mice. Ooh, I hate when that happens. Now, I want to tell you, I don't think the Bible was just picking something gross. Actually, I think the Bible's remembering something that we could sort of scientifically figure out today. How is the bubonic plague spread? Yeah, exactly. Rats with fleas, exactly. And then also what would happen during the bubonic plague? You get tumors, see? So probably they were afflicted by plague, but they saw this as God's punishment for having the ark, and so they very wisely, from a town named Ekron, which is just a few kilometers west of Bet Shemesh, they decide to send it back, and it's a miracle, because they send it back on a cart with what they would do back in those days. If you were afflicted with something, you would make a representation of what's bothering you. So if you got a headache, you'd make a head. You got your knees bothering you, you make a knee, okay? And you take it to a healing place. So they made gold tumors and gold mice, because they just got to get rid. They need some relief, okay? And they put it on a wagon with 2 milch cows, meaning 2 milking cows that have calves. Now, anybody grow up with livestock around here? Okay, our priest Becca, her dad's a dairy farmer. Isn't that cool? And beef farm. So she's like, yeah, she can tell you about cows. And what you know about cows is that they don't leave their babies. This is why they have cattle prods, because you're not going to get a mama cow away from a calf. It ain't going to happen. And yet these 2 cattle walk in a straight line away from Ekron to Bet Shemesh. So that's a miracle too in itself. Now let's read the text. The ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months. Then the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, what should we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us what we should send into its place. They said, if you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but all means return him a guilt offering. Then you will be healed and will be ransomed. And will his hand not then turn from you? And they said, what is the guilt offering we should return to him? And they said, 5 gold tumors and 5 gold mice, according to the lords of the Philistines. But the same plague was upon you as upon your lords. So you must make images of your tumors and images of your mice that ravage the land, and give glory to the God of Israel, and perhaps he will lighten his hand on you and your gods in your land. Why should you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and the Pharaohs hardened their hearts? After he made fools of them, did they not let the people go when they departed? Now then, get ready a new cart, and 2 milch cows that have never borne a yoke, and yoke the cows to the cart, but take their calves home away from them. Take the ark of the Lord and place it on the cart, and put in a box at its side all the figures of gold, which you return to him as a guilt offering, and then send it off and let it go on its way. And watch, if it goes on the way to its own land, to Bet Shemesh, which means house of the sun, by the way, then it is he who has done us this great harm. But if not, we shall know that it is not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by chance. The men did so. They took 2 milch cows, yoked them to the cart, shut up their calves at home. They put the ark of the Lord on the cart, and with the box and the gold mice and the images of their tumors. And the cows went straight in the direction of Bet Shemesh along one highway. Lowing as they went, they turned neither to the right nor to the left. And the lords of the Philistines went after them as far as the border of Bet Shemesh. Okay, what archaeologists think is that this rock was in the field there, and they put the Ark of the Covenant on the field with great rejoicing because the Ark had returned to them. And eventually, they took the stone upon which the 10 Commandments rested and brought it into town and built this chapel around it to venerate it. That's what the current thinking or the current theory might be. I will tell you that one day when the world is right again and we can all return to Israel again and people are spending money again and the economy's back again, this will be turned into a park and it will be a national treasure because you're looking at something where God's own finger wrote his own divine mind on the tablets of stone. The Ten Commandments sat upon that rock. So that rock isn't kind of like a George Washington slept here kind of thing, right? They wanted to remember that the ark had been returned to them. And what's the bigger lesson here? Okay, so why are we reading this old story? I will tell you this too. I took that picture in the wintertime, so that's why it's got some grass growing around it. I was sitting there looking at it with Edon, who some of y'all know, and my son Copeland. We were over there in January of the prior year, and we were a tour group pulled up, a bus pulled up. Now, we like to think that we've got this little secret all to ourselves, right? It's just it's a hole in the ground where the Ten Commandments sat, and we're sitting there. I wish I could take a group, but it's degraded to the point it's kind of dangerous to slip slide down in there. You just can't take groups into something that doesn't have a rail, that kind of thing. Anyway, we're down in this hole looking at it, and I've never touched it. I won't touch it. I remember what happened to that guy in the movie. So anyway, we're telling stories, and we're thinking of big thoughts, and this tour bus roars up. And there's a bunch of Pentecostals, and they get out, and they say, hey, can you tell us where Samson defeated the Philistines? And we were like, over there, right? And so then they just left. And another tour group came up while we were there, and we thought, oh, here we go. And this guy said, hey, can you tell us where the Byzantine church is? And we're like, yeah, it's over there, okay? And no one knew what we were doing. No one knew what we were seeing. And isn't that a little like the mysteries of God, that God's just right up under our noses and the whole world's just hurrying by, looking for everything but the marvels, beneath our nose. So the lesson here is this. Phineas and Hophni got it wrong. God's not a totem. Not a totem. God's not a rabbit foot. God's not an amulet. In the movies they have a cross to ward off vampires, right? The cross is a means to remind us of God's sacrifice for us. It's not something that's going to keep us from harm. We don't keep a special cross around our neck so that we don't have a car accident or cancer or anything. But God doesn't work that way. God wants a relationship with us, not a contract. I think what Phineas and Hophni had done is they had turned God into a box, right? Something. And so the lesson here at Bet Shemesh, which is very, very near Emmaus, by the way, is this. Jesus, upon his resurrection, here's where I want us to wonder together, was just as dangerous, if not more, than before his resurrection. I mean, if you think about why people wanted the wrong things from Jesus. He comes into town on the foal of a donkey, which is something that a general would do when the war was over. I mean, make no mistake, to ride a donkey into Jerusalem is hard to do because the grade is so steep going down in the Kidron Valley and back up again. It'd be easier to walk, but he rode a donkey because it was political theater. If a general rode a war horse, then the war is still being fought. But if you ride a donkey or a foal, a small animal, that means that all is at peace and I'm finished. You can imagine how electric the city was. They're beginning to call him the Messiah. Can you imagine if you had a general or a Messiah who could do stuff, could feed an army with just a few morsels of bread and fish, could raise the dead, could heal the sick? I mean, he's got power, right? And so they wanted him to be a new conquering hero. And then on that Good Friday, Jesus rides into town just like Judah Maccabee, just like those warriors that we mentioned a while ago, 2 centuries before Jesus, just like the warrior who rode in and cleansed the temple. Jesus rides in and he attacks the temple. He overturns the money changers and their tables, legitimate temple business, tawdry certainly, beneath God of course, but he attacks the temple. He doesn't bless the temple like Judah Maccabee did. And so they realize he's a different kind of king. He's not going to play into their hands like they want him to. In other words, he's not going to be a totem. Now, what happens after he's resurrected from the dead and people begin to see Jesus right away? They're going to perhaps leap to the wrong conclusions. They're going to want to do something with him. Now we got a guy you can't kill, right? Jesus has to take his disciples to Galilee, as we learn in John chapter 21, to undo the curse, Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? To set them on a course. They've got to have Pentecost, have the Holy Spirit poured upon them. It's going to take them some time to comprehend what resurrection means for us, what resurrection does for them. And so again, I'm going to harken back to my friend Danny the Digger, who's not a Christian, but he said to me, I believe he went the Western route, because that map that I showed you a minute ago, if you go due west of Jerusalem, that stopping point before you go north, that's Emmaus. It's right there on the highway, right there on the Via Maris. So perhaps he was traveling a route where he wouldn't be recognized right away, just like the two men didn't recognize him as they walked along the road. Isn't that cool? It's all starting to make sense. Now look, we might think that this is just a story for them. Well, those dumb Bible people, they're making a totem out of God and carrying the box around. Well, actually, it's a universal kind of problem. Does anybody remember a Russian ship early in the Ukraine war, the Moskva, that was destroyed by the Ukrainians? Well, it carried a piece of the true cross of Christ on it. Well, that totem didn't do him any good, okay? But I'll tell you another story. So this is a totem story. So this is a dramatic hill. It's actually a dormant volcano called the Horns of Hattin, and you can actually see it from the Sea of Galilee. And if you go to the top of it, you look down on the Sea of Galilee, and a very important battle happened there. On July the 4th, 1187, all the Crusader armies of the Levant, which means under the King of Jerusalem and all the occupying armies that lived in what is now the Holy Land, gathered for a decisive battle against the Caliphate led by Saladin. Now, Saladin was a smart guy. Now, this one, you could see kind of the overreach of the Europeans. It's July the 4th. Anybody been to the Holy Land in July? I hope not, because it's about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh, Stephanie has. You've even been on an archaeology dig, because you had to do it first thing in the morning. So, middle of the day, full armor, battle horses, okay, it's hot. It's real hot. And so what Saladin does is, first thing he does is he cuts off their water supply. So this is on the top of this mountain. So Saladin is where the picture's being made, and they've completely surrounded the mountain with all the armies who've managed somehow to get themselves trapped on this high place. Now, they did have a super weapon called the war horse, and if you've ever seen one riding in battle, you can watch Braveheart and see that. They're huge. These are big things, and they could just ride you over. This was their breakout weapon, and so they knew they always had the war horse to break through the lines. But what Saladin does is, once he cuts off their water, he starts brush fires. So now it's broiling in this thing. So you're wearing full armor. You hadn't had any water. It's not looking good for you, and you can see the Sea of Galilee from here. Now, too bad for the English and the French who are on the mountain, because the horses could also see the Sea of Galilee from here. So when they mount their horses just bolt for the lake because they're parched, and they just ride through the lines, okay, and then Saladin's lines simply close again. They besiege the mountain and utterly destroy the Crusader armies, never to have any sort of rule in this part of the Near East again. It ends. Why am I telling you this story? Because this happens July 4th, 1187. They had with them the true cross. Now, the story of the true cross is this. When Empress Helena, this is Constantine's mother, built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, she believed that she found the cross that upon which Christ had been crucified. Now, I'm going to tell you that true cross is multiplied a bunch. In addition to the Moskva, the boat, I think you can find pieces of the true cross in just about every cathedral of Europe. But here's the deal. They believed it was the true cross. That's where I want to go with this. In other words, people had enshrined it, carried it around. They believed that Christ had been crucified on this piece of wood, and they brought it with them to the Battle of Hattin, believing that as long as they had it with them, they would be protected. They were utterly destroyed. And that cross was taken away, never to be seen again. Again, I want to wonder with you, is our religion a relationship or a totem? Do we treat God like a cosmic gumball machine? We dial in our prayers and we get our blessings. Or are we in a dynamic, living, changing, healing, moving relationship with the living Christ, where our heart's not burning within us when he revealed the scriptures to us? Do our hearts burn, or do we simply carry around something that we need to save us when we want him? That makes sense? So I think this unlocks the mystery, if you will, and the meaning of Emmaus. I'm going to turn this off so we can ask questions.